My name is Ruby Carter. I'm 23 years old, and my life changed over a plate of lukewarm risotto. At my graduation dinner, everyone was laughing. The sound bounced off the polished silverware and the crystal glasses filled with champagne. My parents were beaming, sitting across from me with the kind of proud, self-satisfied smiles that said they had built me from scratch. My father, Mark, raised his glass in a toast, his expensive watch catching the light. My mother, Sarah, adjusted the silk scarf around her neck, her eyes crinkling with what I thought was happiness for me. Then my grandma, Eleanor, leaned forward across the white tablecloth. Her smile was gentle, her eyes full of genuine warmth. I'm glad the $1,200 I send you every month is helping, dear. The room didn't just get quiet. It froze. The laughter died in my brother's throat. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. My mother's smile flickered and went out like a cheap candle. My father's glass, poised for a sip, never reached his lips. The air turned thick and heavy, charged with a silence that was louder than any argument. And in that simple sentence, everything I thought I knew about my family, about sacrifice, about love itself, collapsed into nothing. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. Growing up in the Carter household was like living in a perfectly curated photograph. Our family motto, repeated so often it was etched into my brain, was, "Struggle makes you stronger." My father loved to say it. He'd deliver the line with a paternalistic pat on my shoulder, his voice full of the wisdom of a man who believed he was teaching me a profound truth about the world. He'd say it when I was 16 and came to him asking for a small advance on my allowance to buy a dress for the school dance. He told me to get a job at the local movie theater instead. "The dress will mean more if you earn it yourself, Ruby," he had said, smiling, and I believed him. I worked for 3 weeks, smelling of stale popcorn and disinfectant, and I bought the dress. It did feel good. I thought that feeling was pride. I now know it was the simple relief of survival. My mother's version was softer, more insidious. She called it building character. When I lost the regional spelling bee in 8th grade, she hugged me and whispered, "Disappointment is a tool, honey. It carves out space in your heart for resilience." She had a whole arsenal of these gentle-sounding but brutal philosophies. She believed that hardship was a virtue, but only, I would come to realize, when it was applied to me. This philosophy was the foundation of my college experience. The day they drove me to my dorm, they didn't help me unpack. They stood in the doorway of the tiny cinder-block room, their arms crossed. My dad surveyed the bare mattress and the empty desk. "This is it, kiddo," he announced, his voice booming with false encouragement. "The mountain. It's all yours to climb." My mother fixed the collar of my shirt and gave me a $100 bill. "For emergencies," she said, as if the next 4 years of my life weren't going to be one long, rolling emergency. They hugged me, told me they were proud, and left. I stood alone in that empty room, the crisp bill in my hand feeling less like a safety net and more like the first and final payment for my independence. And so, I climbed. My life became a masterclass in budgeting, sacrifice, and exhaustion. My first job was shelving books in the university library's basement archives. It was as lonely as it sounds. I'd spend hours in the silent, climate-controlled air, the only sound the soft whisper of paper and the hum of the ventilation. I'd run my fingers over the spines of books I'd never have time to read, my mind always calculating. This shift is worth 3 chapters of my biology textbook. This hour pays for tonight's dinner. Dinner was almost always the same. A packet of instant ramen with a single sad egg dropped into it for protein. I told myself it was the quintessential college experience, something I'd laugh about one day. My second job was at a 24-hour diner called The Corner Booth, a place that always smelled of burnt coffee and regret. I worked the late shift, from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m., 3 nights a week. My coworkers were tired, cynical people who were much older than me, trying to support families on minimum wage and dwindling tips. I'd refill coffee cups for truckers, serve pancakes to drunk students, and wipe down sticky tables, all with a smile plastered on my face. At 2 in the morning, I'd walk back to my dorm under the buzzing orange streetlights, my shoes sticking to the pavement, a few crumpled dollar bills in my pocket. Then I'd sit at my desk and force my blurry eyes to focus on lecture notes until the sun came up. There was a constant, gnawing hunger that defined those years. It wasn't just for food. It was a hunger for rest, for peace, for a single day where I wasn't terrified of a bill I couldn't pay. I remember one specific afternoon in my sophomore year, standing in the grocery store holding a small basket. I had exactly $12.67 to last me for the rest of the week. I had bread, peanut butter, and a carton of milk. I wanted to buy a bag of oranges, They were on sale, but they cost $3. I stood in the aisle for 10 minutes, my phone's calculator open, trying to justify the purchase. I remember thinking, if I get the oranges, I can't afford the bus fare to the library tomorrow. I'll have to walk. It was a 30-minute walk. I put the oranges back. The feeling of shame was so intense, it was physical. It was a hot, tight knot in my chest. I felt like a failure. Meanwhile, the photograph of my family's life remained perfect, even from a distance. Their world was not one of sacrifice. It was one of upgrades. My mother's phone calls were a catalog of their comforts. "Oh, Ruby, your father and I had the most wonderful weekend," she'd chirp. "We went to that new vineyard resort 2 hours away. The wine tasting was divine and my massage was heavenly. You have to go sometime." She'd say this knowing I couldn't afford a bus ticket home for Thanksgiving. My father bought a new car. It was a sleek, dark blue sedan. When I asked about it, he was dismissive. "It was a necessary business expense, Ruby. You have to project success to be successful." My brother Ben was the poster child for their generosity. He was 2 years older than me, and his life was a seamless series of triumphs funded by our parents. They paid his rent, co-signed for his car, and funded his annual ski trip to Aspen with his friends. His Instagram was a painful gallery of their favoritism. Pictures of him on a mountain, grinning, holding a craft beer, a photo of his new watch, a graduation gift from them captioned, "Best parents ever," a shot of him and my parents at a 5-star restaurant celebrating his promotion. I saw it all. I saw the spa days, the golf club memberships, the catered parties, the constant casual spending. A small, wounded part of me would try to question it. During one call, I finally got the courage to ask my mom directly. "It sounds like things are going really well for you guys," I said, trying to keep my voice light. I thought money was tight. Her response was immediate and sharp, a slap disguised as concern. "Ruby, it's not polite to talk about money. Your father works very hard to provide us with a comfortable life. You should be happy for us. Besides, we are teaching you something far more valuable than money, self-reliance. One day you'll thank us for it." And just like that, I was the villain. I was the ungrateful, impolite daughter. I was the one who didn't understand. They were so skilled at twisting reality, at making me feel like my struggles were my own fault, and their comforts were a completely separate issue. They made me feel guilty for my own poverty, so I stopped asking. I doubled down on my own narrative. I was strong. I was independent. I was building character. I told myself their life had nothing to do with mine. I convinced myself that they were proud of me for climbing the mountain alone, never once suspecting that they weren't just watching from the bottom. They were actively making the climb steeper, all while hiding the elevator. That night at the graduation dinner, sitting across from them as they beamed with pride, I still believed it. I thought my diploma was the proof, the trophy at the end of the long, hard race. I thought their smiles were for me. I had no idea their smiles were for themselves, for pulling off the most elaborate and cruel deception of all. They weren't proud of me for my strength. They were proud of me for my silence, for my willingness to suffer without ever questioning the photograph. They were celebrating the success of their own illusion. The moments before the bomb dropped were painfully normal. My father had just finished a toast, his voice thick with a practiced sentimentality that I now recognize as performance. He spoke of my tenacity and work ethic, words that felt like praise but were actually acknowledgments of the struggle he had imposed on me. My mother, Sarah, dabbed the corner of her eye with a napkin, a perfect portrait of maternal pride. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of approval from my brother and grandmother, it was all part of the carefully orchestrated scene of the proud family. The waiter had just set down our entrees. I had ordered the risotto, a choice that felt like an indulgence after 4 years of instant noodles. The air was warm and smelled of roasted garlic and expensive perfume. I was smiling, a genuine tired smile. I had made it. I was about to start my life. In that moment, I felt a flicker of the love and belonging I had craved for so long. It was all a lie, but it was a beautiful one. Then Grandma Eleanor leaned forward. The shift was subtle. Her posture changed, her gentle, wrinkled face illuminated by the candlelight. Her smile was aimed directly at me, a beacon of pure, uncomplicated affection. And then she spoke the words, "I'm glad the $1,500 I send you every month is helping, dear." Her voice was soft, but it landed in the center of the table with the force of a physical blow. The first thing that happened was the sound died. My father's chuckle caught in his throat. My mother's sigh of contentment evaporated. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant, the clatter of distant plates, the low hum of other people's conversations, seemed to recede, leaving our table in a pocket of thick, ringing silence. My eyes were locked on my grandmother. Her expression was still open and loving. She had no idea what she had just done. She thought she was sharing in my success, revealing a happy secret that bound us together. She couldn't see the grenade she had just rolled onto the pristine white tablecloth. I felt my own smile freeze on my face. The words didn't compute at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from reality. That $500 every month. My brain tried to process the number. It was an impossible sum, a mythical figure from a life that wasn't mine. It was more than my rent and utilities and groceries for a month combined. It was the price of the oranges I'd put back. It was the cost of a doctor's visit I'd skipped. It was 4 years of peace of mind. My body reacted before my mind did. A cold wave washed over me, starting in my stomach and spreading outwards to my fingertips. The risotto in front of me suddenly looked nauseating. I blinked slowly, my gaze shifting from my grandmother to my parents. I saw it all in a split second of horrifying clarity. My father's face, which had been ruddy with wine and self-satisfaction, had gone slack. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. He stared at his water glass with an intensity that suggested it held the answers to the universe. He did not look at me. He did not look at his mother. My mother's reaction was even more telling. Her smile didn't just disappear. It collapsed. For a fraction of a second, before she could construct a new expression, I saw pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes. It was the look of a cornered animal. Then, the mask snapped back into place. It was a wobbly, unconvincing mask of confusion. "Oh, Mama," she began, her voice a high, brittle thing. "What are you talking about?" But I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was looking at my brother Ben. He was staring at our parents, his fork hovering over his plate, his easygoing expression replaced by a deep, bewildered frown. He was connecting dots, the gears turning behind his eyes. I finally found my voice. It felt like it belonged to someone else, a calm, detached stranger. "Sorry?" I asked, the word hanging in the air. I wasn't just asking for clarification. I was offering them an out, a chance to correct the record, to say Grandma was mistaken, to create any plausible lie that would allow the illusion to survive for a few more minutes. Grandma, bless her heart, took my question as a sign of humble confusion. "The money, dear," she repeated patiently, as if explaining something to a child. "For your tuition and your living expenses. I set up an automatic transfer to your parents' account right before you started your first semester. Your mother told me it was easier for the university's billing department that way. I wanted to make sure you were always taken care of." Taken care of. The phrase echoed in the silent cavern of my mind. I thought of the nights I'd spent crying from hunger and stress. I thought of the threadbare coat I wore for 3 winters because I couldn't afford a new one. I thought of the constant, grinding anxiety that had been my only companion. And all this time, there had been a lifeboat. My parents hadn't just hidden it from me. They had been relaxing in it, sipping champagne, while they watched me drown. I turned my head slowly, deliberately, to face my parents. The detached stranger was still in control of my voice. I would not scream. I would not cry. I would not give them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. I would be a scientist observing a specimen. "I never got that money," I said. The statement was flat, devoid of accusation, devoid of emotion. It was a simple declaration of fact, and it was more damning than any scream could ever have been. My father choked on a sip of water, a series of wet, desperate coughs. My mother jumped in to fill the void, her voice strained into a semblance of lightheartedness. "There must be some misunderstanding," she chirped, waving a dismissive hand, her bracelets clinking nervously. "Mama, you must be misremembering the amount." It was a lovely gift, of course, but it was nowhere near that much. She was trying to gaslight her own mother in front of a full table, but Grandma was not a fool. Her gentle smile had vanished, replaced by a look of sharp, steely clarity. Her eyes narrowed. "My memory is perfectly fine, Sarah," she said, her tone losing all its warmth. "It was $1,500, transferred from my savings account to your checking account on the first day of every month for 48 consecutive months. I have the bank statements to prove it." The words bank statements hung in the air. They were solid, real, undeniable. The lie was cornered. My father, finally finding his voice, tried to assert his authority. It was his last desperate move. "This is hardly the time or the place to be discussing our private family finances," he grumbled, his voice low and threatening. He shot me a look that was meant to silence me, a look that had worked my entire life, but it didn't work anymore. The girl who was scared of his disappointment was gone. In her place was someone who had just seen the truth. The perfect family was a lie. The struggle was a lie. Their love, the very foundation of my world, was the biggest lie of all. The bombshell had gone off, and the smoke was finally clearing. revealing a truth more ugly and devastating than I could have ever imagined. In the echoing silence that followed my grandmother's mention of bank statements, my mind detached. The scene at the table, my mother's panicked face, my father's blotchy anger, my brother's dawning horror, became a distant tableau. I was no longer there. Instead, I was spiraling backward, tumbling through 4 years of my life. But this time, I was seeing it all through a new, horrific lens. Every memory, once a testament to my resilience, was now an exhibit in the case against them. Each hardship was not a random act of fate. It was a choice they had made for me. My mind landed on a specific night in the winter of my sophomore year. It was the peak of flu season, and I had gotten it bad. I was living in a cheap off-campus apartment with a rattling heater that did little to fight off the biting cold. For 3 days, I lay in bed, shivering under a thin blanket, my body aching with a fever that made the world feel blurry and unreal. I had no health insurance through the university. It was an extra fee I couldn't afford, so a doctor was out of the question. I couldn't even afford flu medicine. My entire pharmacy consisted of a half-empty bottle of generic ibuprofen. I had a shift at the diner that night. I knew I couldn't miss it. Missing a shift meant losing $30 or $40 in tips, and that was my grocery money for the next week. I called my mom that afternoon, my voice a hoarse croak. I didn't ask for money. I had already learned that lesson. I just wanted to hear her voice, to feel some connection to the world outside my miserable, cold room. "Oh, honey, you sound awful," she had chirped, her sympathy feeling thin and distant. "You need to rest and drink plenty of fluids." There was a pause, and I could hear the sound of a hairdryer in the background. "I wish I could talk more, but your father is taking me out for a surprise birthday dinner tonight. He won't tell me where, but he told me to dress up. You know your father, always so romantic." I remember hanging up the phone and feeling a profound sense of aloneness. I dragged myself out of bed, my head pounding, and put on my uniform. I worked the entire 8-hour shift, my body trembling with chills, a fake smile plastered on my face. At one point, my manager, a gruff man named Sal, looked at me and said, "Kid, you look like death. Go home." I shook my head and told him I was fine. I needed the money. Now, sitting at that dinner table, I did the math. My sophomore year? A winter month. That month, like every other, $1,500 of my money had been deposited into their account. While I was working with a 102-degree fever to make $40, they were enjoying a romantic, expensive dinner. My illness, my misery, it had funded their celebration. They hadn't just neglected me, they had profited from it. The money that could have bought me medicine, a doctor's visit, or even just the ability to take a single night off to recover, was paying for their steak and wine. The memories kept coming, each one sharper and more painful than the last. I remembered the social isolation. My friends in my freshman year had all gone to Mexico for spring break. They begged me to come. The trip cost $600. It might as well have been $1 million. I told them I had to work. I spent that week at the library, shelving books in the silent, empty building, scrolling through their pictures of sunshine and blue water, a hollow ache in my chest. I felt so disconnected from their world, so fundamentally different. I thought it was because I was more serious, more focused on my future. But that wasn't it. It was just poverty. And it was an artificial poverty, constructed for me by my own parents. That single month's payment of $2,500 could have funded my trip, with money to spare. But they had wanted a new set of patio furniture that spring. I had seen it, pristine and white, on their deck when I went home for the summer. I thought of the constant, grinding academic pressure, made 100 times worse by my financial situation. The story of the history textbook was the most galling. It was for a class on Renaissance art, a subject I loved. The professor required a specific, glossy, oversized textbook that cost $220. I told myself it was an unjustifiable expense. I tried to use the copy in the library, but there were 30 other students in the class with the same idea. It was always checked out. I fell behind on the readings. My essays were weak because I couldn't reference the specific plates and details in the book. My professor, a stern woman who didn't tolerate excuses, called me out in class for being unprepared. The shame was suffocating. I got a C in that class, the only C on my entire transcript. It felt like a brand, a permanent mark of my failure. I had blamed myself entirely. I thought I hadn't managed my time well enough, hadn't been clever enough to find a workaround. The truth was so much simpler. They had the money for my book. They had it the whole time. In the month I was failing that class, their bank statement, I could now guess, would show a weekend trip to a boutique hotel or a shopping spree at the mall. My academic struggle was less important than their leisure. They hadn't just stolen money from me. That was the raw, brutal fact of it, but the truth was deeper and more painful. They had stolen my experiences. They had stolen my health. They had stolen my confidence and replaced it with a constant, humming anxiety. They had stolen 4 years of my youth, a time that should have been about learning and growth, and turned it into a desperate struggle for survival. They took my dignity every time they forced me to live on scraps while they feasted. The most vivid memory of all was of a phone call during my junior year. My laptop, a cheap, refurbished model I had bought with my diner savings, finally died. It sparked and went black in the middle of writing a final paper. I panicked. I had no backup and the paper was due in 2 days. In a moment of pure desperation, I called my dad. I was crying, unable to hide the stress in my voice. "Dad, my laptop is broken. I don't know what to do. I have to finish this paper." His response was a heavy, theatrical sigh. "Ruby, this is exactly what I'm talking about. A failure to plan. You should have been saving for emergencies. A laptop is a tool for your education. You have to be responsible for your tools." "I do save," I sobbed. "But my car needed new tires last month, and I had to pay for that. I don't have $500 just lying around." "Well, we can't just bail you out," he said, his voice cold and clinical. "A handout teaches you nothing. Go to the campus computer lab. This is a lesson in resourcefulness." I hung up the phone, completely shattered. I spent the next 48 hours in the cold, fluorescent-lit computer lab, fighting for a free terminal, rewriting my entire 10-page paper from memory. I got it done, my eyes burning from exhaustion. I saw it as a victory, another mountain I had climbed alone. Now I knew the truth. They hadn't been teaching me a lesson. They had been punishing me. They weren't building my character. They were breaking my spirit. That night, as I sat staring at the shattered illusion of my family, the hurt was so immense it felt like it would split me in two. But underneath the hurt, something else was beginning to form. It was cold and hard and clear. It wasn't explosive anger. It was the quiet, chilling realization that I had survived their cruelty. I had been forged in the fire they had set. And that realization didn't make me want to scream. It made me strategic. The rest of the dinner was a blur of mumbled excuses and a swift, awkward exit. My parents practically threw cash on the table and herded us out of the restaurant, their faces tight with a mixture of fury and fear. They were furious at my grandmother for speaking the truth and terrified of me for hearing it. The drive home was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The silence in the car was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It pressed in on me from all sides. I sat in the back seat, staring out the window at the blurry city lights, my mind working with a clarity I had never experienced before. My parents, I knew, were in damage control mode. They were counting on my emotional response. They expected tears. They expected accusations. They expected a dramatic, messy confrontation that they could twist and manage. They would call me hysterical, ungrateful, overly sensitive. They would paint themselves as the misunderstood parents, attacked by a confused old woman and an emotional daughter. An outburst from me was the weapon they needed to regain control of the narrative. I decided in the cold, humming silence of that car ride that I would not give it to them. When we got back to their house, their large, beautifully decorated house that I now saw as a monument to their lies, my father turned to me in the hallway. "We need to talk," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'm really tired," I said, my voice deliberately flat and empty. "It was a long day. I'm going to bed." I didn't wait for a response. I walked up the stairs to the guest room, my movements calm and measured. I could feel their eyes on my back, their confusion and frustration palpable. My quiet compliance was something they didn't know how to fight. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, the binder of my thesis still in my bag, a testament to a struggle that should never have happened. And I thought, for years my life had been about reaction, reacting to a bill, reacting to hunger, reacting to their lectures. For the first time, I was going to be proactive. I understood that rage, the hot, screaming kind I felt simmering in my gut, was a fire. It would burn brightly and then burn out, leaving nothing but ash. It was loud and messy, but ultimately it was powerless. Justice was different. Justice had to be cold, sharp, and precise. It required a plan. The first step of that plan formed in my mind around 3 a.m. I needed an ally, and I had one. My grandmother, but I couldn't call her from their house. I had to get out. The next morning, I rose before they did. I scribbled a quick, non-committal note and left it on the kitchen island. Needed to get some air and clear my head. Be back later. Then I got in my old beat-up car and drove. The destination was clear in my mind. My grandmother's house was a small brick bungalow, a place of warmth and comfort from my childhood. When she opened the door, Her face was etched with worry. She had clearly been up all night, too. She ushered me inside, and the familiar smell of cinnamon and old books wrapped around me like a hug. She led me to her kitchen table and without a word began to make tea. The ritual was calming, a small pocket of normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down. As she poured the steaming liquid into 2 porcelain cups, I finally broke the silence. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I laid out the facts of my life for the past 4 years with the dispassionate clarity of a witness giving testimony. I told her about the diner, the library, the hunger. I told her about the flu, the textbook, the broken laptop. I told her about the shame and the constant gnawing anxiety. With each story, I saw the worry in her eyes deepen into a sorrow so profound it seemed to age her right in front of me. Her hand holding her teacup trembled. She wasn't just hearing about my hardship. She was realizing her own role in it. Her trust had been a weapon used against her own granddaughter. She had been their accomplice without her knowledge. When I finished, she stared into her teacup, a single tear rolling down her cheek and splashing onto the saucer. "Oh, Ruby," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I thought I was helping you. I thought I was making things easier." She looked up, her eyes blazing with a newfound fury. "What do you want me to do? I will call them right now. I will cut them off. I will disinherit them. Just tell me what to do." Her rage was a comforting mirror of my own, but my plan required something different. It required finesse. "No," I said gently, reaching across the table to still her trembling hand. "That's what they expect. If you confront them now, they will turn it around. They'll say I've manipulated you. They'll tell the rest of the family that you've become senile and I'm taking advantage. They will make themselves the victims. We can't let that happen." She looked at me, confused. "Then what, dear? We can't just let them get away with it." "We won't," I assured her, my voice low and steady. "They are going to pay back every single cent, but we have to be smarter than they are." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. "Here's what I want you to do. I want you to keep sending the money." Her eyes widened. "What? Ruby, I can't." "Not to them," I interrupted. "To me." In the hour before dawn that morning, while my parents slept in their comfortable beds, I had been busy. I had used my phone to open a new online-only bank account. It was in my name only, linked to my email address, completely invisible to them. I wrote the new account number and routing information on a napkin from my grandmother's counter and pushed it across the table. "Call your bank," I said. "Tell them you need to update the automatic transfer information. Tell them it's a new account for me. If my parents call you, I want you to act like everything is normal. Tell them you were just confused the other night. Let them think they've weathered the storm. Let them get comfortable." The confusion on my grandmother's face slowly melted away, replaced by a dawning, fierce understanding. A slow, cold smile spread across her lips. It was a mirror of the one I felt growing on my own. She was seeing the shape of my justice. Greed makes people careless. My parents, believing they had successfully navigated a close call, would become lazy. They would continue their spending, assuming the money was still flowing in. The silence from the bank would be their only notification that something was wrong, and by the time they noticed, it would be too late. Their own arrogance would be the mechanism of their downfall. "They will expose themselves," I said softly. My grandmother picked up the napkin, her hand no longer shaking. She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a pride that was deeper and more real than any I had ever seen from my parents. "You always were the smart one," she said, her voice filled with admiration and steel. "I'll make the call right now." That was step 1. The trap was laid. All they had to do was walk into it, and I knew with absolute certainty that their greed would not let them down. Step 1 was complete. The financial pipeline had been rerouted. Now came step 2, gathering the evidence. And for that, I needed to play a role I had unknowingly been rehearsing my entire life, the perfect, unassuming daughter. The first phone call after my visit to Grandma's was the hardest. My mother's name flashed on the screen and I felt a jolt of pure ice in my veins. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and answered with the most cheerfully neutral voice I could manage. "Hey, Mom. Ruby, honey. We were so worried. You just left this morning without a word." Her voice was syrupy sweet, a classic sign she was trying to smooth something over. "Oh, sorry," I said, walking around my small temporary apartment. "I just needed some air. That dinner was a lot." I intentionally left the statement vague. "I know, sweetie. It was a terrible misunderstanding. Your grandmother, she gets confused sometimes." We were going to explain everything. The lies came so easily to her, so practiced. "It's okay, Mom," I said. And this was the most important lie I would ever tell. "I was just overwhelmed. I'm fine. I could almost hear the sigh of relief on her end. Oh, good. Well, your father and I want to make it up to you. Let's do a proper celebration for your graduation next month. A big party for all our friends and family to see how proud we are. I knew what it was. A performance. A public display of our perfect family to erase the memory of that disastrous dinner. It was also the perfect opportunity. I'd love that, I said. The trap was set. Now I just had to build the cage. Patience became my closest friend. I spent the next few weeks playing the part of the reconciled daughter. I answered their calls. I sent warm, generic texts filled with smiley face emojis. I even agreed to have dinner with them and Ben once. A horribly tense affair where they talked about everything except the money. They were testing the waters, seeing if the storm had passed. I gave them a calm, placid surface, and like the narcissists they were, they believed it reflected their own innocence. My chance to get the evidence came 2 weeks before the party. My parents were going away for the weekend to a wine tasting festival. A trip, I later discovered, that they paid for with that month's check from my grandmother. They asked if I could house sit and water the plants. It was almost too easy. Of course, I'd said. No problem at all. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I went to work. I knew my father, a man of predictable habits, kept all his important documents in his home office. He was also technologically inept and had once asked me to set up his computer so his passwords would save automatically. He thought it was convenient. I now saw it as a gift. I sat down in his large leather chair, the one he always lectured me from, and logged into his computer. It felt like a violation, but I reminded myself of every hungry night, every moment of shame they had put me through. This wasn't snooping. It was an audit. I went straight to their online banking portal, and there it was. 48 months of history, laid out in black and white. My hands shook as I opened the first statement from 4 years ago. On the first of the month, a deposit, $500, transfer from Eleanor Carter. A few days later, withdrawals, Coach handbags, $450, the Oak Room Steakhouse, $280, premium golf supply, $200. I went through every single statement, month by month, year by year. It was a sickening chronicle of their self-indulgence, paid for by my struggle. I saw the spa retreats, the weekend getaways, the expensive dinners, the endless online shopping. I saw transfers to my brother, Ben, labeled apartment help and new car fund. He wasn't entirely innocent, but he was a product of their system. They had given him the world, and he had never thought to ask what it cost. With a cold, methodical focus, I downloaded every statement. 3 years of them. The bank's limit for online records, but more than enough. I saved them to a thumb drive. I found their credit card statements too and downloaded those. I cross-referenced the dates. The day I'd called my dad crying for $50, they had spent $300 on a new espresso machine. The week I had gotten a C in my history class because I couldn't afford the textbook, they had bought front-row tickets to a concert. The evidence was overwhelming. It was damning, but I needed to present it perfectly. Back in my apartment, I spent an entire weekend organizing the files. I printed everything. I bought a simple black binder and a set of colored highlighters. My rage was gone, replaced by the detached precision of an accountant. Every deposit from Grandma I highlighted in green. $72,000. That was the total. $72,000 that was meant for me. Every luxury purchase, the vacations, the jewelry, the designer clothes, I highlighted in pink. Every transfer to my brother, I highlighted in blue. Everyday expenses that they could have easily afforded but paid for with my money, like their mortgage and car payments, I highlighted in yellow. When I was done, the binder was a rainbow of their greed, page after page of their betrayal, neatly color-coded for maximum impact. I made 3 copies, one for me, one for my grandmother, and one for the party. In the final week before the celebration, my act was flawless. I helped my mom pick out decorations. I listened to my dad drone on about the people from his work who were coming. I smiled. I nodded. I played the part of the proud daughter, their shining achievement. They were so busy congratulating themselves on their successful parenting that they never saw the executioner sharpening her blade. The night before the party, I met with Grandma. I gave her one of the binders. She sat in her armchair, reading through it page by page, her expression hardening with each turn. The silence in her living room was heavy, broken only by the rustle of paper. When she finished, she closed the binder and placed it on the table beside her. She looked at me, her eyes clear and resolute. "They didn't just steal from you, Ruby," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "They stole from me too. They stole my peace of mind. They made me a fool." "Tomorrow," I said, "we make it right." She nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Tomorrow, she agreed. We end it. I left her house with the third binder in my bag. I wasn't the scared, hungry college student anymore. I wasn't the daughter desperate for their approval. I was ready. I had 3 years of their lies in a folder, and I was about to deliver the final audit. The party was exactly as I'd expected, a carefully staged performance of family success. My parents had rented out a private room at a country club, complete with a catered buffet and an open bar. About 30 people were there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and my parents' closest friends. The ones who had heard for years about their responsible, self-sufficient daughter. My father walked around, glass of whiskey in hand, accepting congratulations like he had personally written my thesis. My mother floated through the room, a perfect hostess in a new silk dress, her smile bright and brittle. I moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and handshakes, my own smile feeling like a mask. Inside, my heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. I was not nervous. I was a bomb that had already been armed. This was just the countdown. My bag, containing the binder, felt heavy at my side. My brother Ben caught me by the buffet table. "Hey, you," he said, smiling his easy, charming smile. "Proud of you, Ruby. You really did it the hard way." "I had to," I said, looking him directly in the eye. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He had no idea. He just saw me as the struggling artist type, while he was the pragmatic one. The truth was that his pragmatism had been funded by my hardship. An hour into the party, my father clinked a knife against his glass, calling for everyone's attention. He gave a rambling, self-congratulatory speech about the importance of hard work, and the pride he and my mother felt in raising such a capable daughter. People applauded, and my mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Then, my grandmother, who had been sitting quietly at the main table, chose her moment. As the applause died down, she raised her own glass. Her voice, though soft, carried across the room with surprising authority. "I'd like to say something, too," she said. All eyes turned to her. My parents smiled, expecting more praise. "I am so incredibly proud of my granddaughter, Ruby. I know how hard these past 4 years have been for her. That's why I was so happy to help. I'm just so glad the $1,500 I sent every month helped you get through it, dear." It was a slightly different line, updated for the occasion, but it had the same effect. A few people looked confused. A ripple of awkward silence spread through the room. My parents froze, their smiles pasted on their faces. I saw my mother shoot a venomous look at my grandmother. This was my cue. I let the silence stretch for a beat, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. Then I spoke, my voice calm and clear, loud enough for everyone at the main table to hear. "I never got it, Grandma." Gasps rippled through the nearby tables. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, turned to me, her brow furrowed. "What?" My father stepped forward, his face turning a blotchy red. "Now, Ruby, we talked about this. It was a simple misunderstanding with the accounts." "Was it?" I asked, my voice still level. My mother rushed to his side, forcing a laugh. "Oh, honey, let's not bore everyone with family finances. Your grandmother is a little confused about the details, that's all." Grandma's voice cut through her excuses, sharp as ice. "I am not confused, Sarah. You told me the university required a direct deposit into a parental account for financial aid reasons. You told me it was the only way." My father's jovial host persona was cracking. "This is a private matter," he hissed, his voice low. "We will discuss this at home." "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it was absolute. It stopped him cold. I reached down into my bag and pulled out the black binder. I placed it on the center of the table with a soft, definitive thud. The room fell completely silent. Everyone was watching. "I think we should discuss it now," I continued, opening the binder to the first page, a summary sheet where I had tallied the totals. "Because I don't think this was a misunderstanding. I think this was theft. How dare you?" My mother whispered, her face ashen. "I dare," I said, "because I have proof." I turned the binder around for everyone to see. "Here are the past 3 years of your bank statements. Every single deposit from Grandma is highlighted in green. A total of $54,000 just in the last 3 years. I flipped the page. "And here are your purchases. Highlighted in pink are the luxuries, the spa weekends, the golf clubs, the designer clothes. Highlighted in blue are the thousands of dollars you sent to Ben for his car and his apartment. And highlighted in yellow is every time you used my education money to pay your own mortgage." I looked from my mother's horrified face to my father's slack-jawed expression. I looked at my brother, whose face was a mask of disbelief and dawning comprehension. He was finally seeing it. He was finally understanding. "Every vacation you took," I said, my voice resonating in the dead silence. "Every expensive dinner you enjoyed. Every time you told me to be more responsible with money, you were spending mine. You didn't just lie to me and Grandma. You stole my life for 4 years. And I have every single receipt right here." The air in the room thickened until it felt like it would crack. My father opened his mouth, but no words came out. My mother stared at the open binder as if it were a venomous snake. The party was over. The performance was done. And the truth, in all its ugly, color-coded detail, was finally on display for everyone to see. The binder sat on the table like a judgment. For a long moment, nobody moved. The guests on the periphery were whispering, their eyes wide, darting between me and my parents. The closer family members were frozen in a state of shock. It was my grandmother who finally moved. She reached out a steady hand and pulled the binder towards her. She didn't need to read it. She had already seen her own copy. But this was for them. This was for the audience. She slowly turned the pages, her expression grim. Each rustle of paper was like a hammer blow in the silent room. My mother began to tremble. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. My father simply stared, his face a mottled gray. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world catch fire. When Grandma reached the last page, she closed the binder with a soft snap. She lifted her head and looked directly at my mother, her daughter. Her voice was no longer sharp. It was filled with a deep, sorrowful weight that was far more terrifying. "You stole from your own daughter," she whispered, the words carrying the force of a final verdict. "You watched her starve while you went on vacation." That broke my mother. A sob tore from her throat, and she reached for Grandma's arm, her composure shattering into a million pieces. "Mama, please," she cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "It wasn't like that. It was just temporary. We were going to pay it all back, I swear. We just hit a rough patch and we didn't want to worry anyone." Grandma pulled her arm away as if she'd been touched by something unclean. She stood up, her small frame suddenly radiating an immense and unshakable authority. She was no longer just a grandmother. She was the matriarch, the judge, and the jury. "Temporary theft, Sarah?" Grandma's voice was iron. It cut through my mother's pathetic sobs and silenced them. "Is that what you call it? A rough patch?" I saw the statements. I saw the $500 handbags and the weekend trips. That isn't a rough patch. That is greed. I raised you better than this. She then turned her gaze to my father, who flinched as if he'd been struck. He tried to speak, to muster some of his old blustering authority. "Eleanor, listen." "No, Mark, you listen," she commanded, her voice low and furious. "You stood by and let this happen. You lectured this girl about responsibility while you stole the resources she needed to be responsible. You are a hypocrite and a coward." The words hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. My Aunt Carol was staring at my mother with open disgust. My uncle was shaking his head slowly. The foundation of my parents' carefully constructed social standing was crumbling to dust in real time. My brother Ben was the one who surprised me. He looked from the binder to our parents, and his face, which had been a mess of confusion, hardened into anger. "Is this true?" he asked them, his voice shaking. "The money for my car? For my deposit? Did that come from Ruby?" My mother couldn't even look at him. My father just stared at the floor. That was all the answer he needed. I saw something in him break then, the comfortable, easy ignorance he had lived in his whole life. He looked over at me, his eyes full of a shame so profound it was almost painful to watch. He had been their golden boy, but he now understood he was just the beneficiary of a crime. Grandma delivered the final sentence. "From now on," she declared to the room, "the money that was meant for Ruby will go to Ruby, directly. And as for the rest of it," she pulled out her phone. My father's eyes widened in panic. "Eleanor, don't," he pleaded. She ignored him. She dialed a number and put the phone on speaker. A man's voice answered. "Hello, David. Eleanor? Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, David," she said, her voice chillingly calm. "I need you to do something for me first thing in the morning. I want you to close the joint account I have with my daughter. Then, I want you to begin the process of liquidating every asset I have co-signed for them. And finally, I want you to draft the paperwork to have Mark and Sarah removed as beneficiaries from my will." A collective gasp went through the room. This was more than a punishment. It was an excommunication. "Consider it done, Eleanor," the attorney's voice replied. She hung up and looked at my parents, who seemed to have shrunk in their expensive clothes. They were utterly defeated. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I had done what I came to do. Justice, I had decided, doesn't need an audience to gloat. It just needs to be served. I picked up my bag, gave my grandmother a small, grateful nod, and walked out of the room. I didn't look back at my parents, at the stunned faces of my relatives, or at the wreckage of the life they had built on lies. I walked out into the cool night air, took a deep breath of freedom, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt like I could finally rest. The weeks that followed the party were a cascade of quiet, inevitable consequences. I didn't have a front row seat to my parents' downfall. I received news of it in fragments, like reports from a distant war zone. My grandmother was my main source of information. She would call me every few days, her voice calm and factual, to give me updates. The first domino to fall was financial. As promised, her lawyer moved swiftly. The accounts were frozen. The credit lines co-signed by Grandma were severed, and the safety net they had relied on for their entire adult lives vanished overnight. It turned out that my father's successful consulting business was more of a hobby, propped up for years by my grandmother's steady support. My mother hadn't worked in over 2 decades. Their lifestyle, the country club membership, the 2 luxury cars, the perfectly landscaped home, was a house of cards built on someone else's money. Without that support, it collapsed with astonishing speed. 3 months after the party, I was driving through my old neighborhood when I saw it. A large garish for sale sign hammered into the front lawn of my childhood home. The cheerful red and white of the sign felt like a scar on the perfect green grass my father had been so proud of. The mortgage, as it turned out, was something they could no longer manage. I pulled my car over to the curb and just looked at the house for a long time. I felt no sadness, no nostalgia. It wasn't a home to me anymore. It was just a building, a crime scene, a museum of my stolen youth. I put the car in drive and pulled away without looking back. The social fallout was just as brutal, but quieter. My mother, who had curated her life on social media with the precision of a magazine editor, went completely silent. Her page, once a vibrant feed of smiling photos from brunches, charity events, and vacations, became a digital graveyard. No more posts about her wonderful family. No more pictures of her proud achievements. Her friends, the ones who had witnessed her public humiliation, began to distance themselves. The phone calls stopped. The lunch invitations dried up. My Aunt Carol, my mom's own sister, told me in a hushed phone call that she was too ashamed to even speak to her. My father's collapse was less visible, but just as complete. His name vanished from the Rotary Club newsletter. He stepped down from the board of the local business association. The men he played golf with every Saturday suddenly had other plans. In a small, interconnected suburban community, reputation is currency, and his was now worthless. They weren't just thieves. They were fools who had been caught. Ben was collateral damage. He moved out of his parents' house and into a small apartment with 2 roommates, a world away from the sleek downtown place he'd had before. He called me once, his voice heavy with a shame that wasn't his to carry. "I'm so sorry, Ruby," he said. "I never knew. I feel like such an idiot. It's not your fault, Ben," I told him, and I meant it. "You believed what they told you." We both did. He was trying to make it on his own now, without their help, and I could hear the struggle in his voice. For the first time, my brother and I were on equal footing. Meanwhile, my life was quietly, steadily, beginning. Grandma redirected every cent she had once given my parents into a trust in my name. I met with her and her lawyer, David, in his formal, wood-paneled office. It wasn't a celebration. It was a restitution. The money wasn't a gift. It was back pay. I used a portion of it to put a down payment on a small condo in a part of the city I loved. I furnished it simply, with second-hand furniture and shelves overflowing with books I could now afford to buy. It was the first place that ever felt truly mine. I didn't celebrate my parents' demise. There was no joy in watching their lives unravel. There was only a profound and heavy sense of peace. It was the peace of a battle finally over. The peace of a debt being settled, not by me, but by the natural order of things. Time and truth were collecting what was owed. I was moving forward, building a life they couldn't touch. Every book I bought, every bill I paid on time, every meal I ate without anxiety was a small act of reclamation. I was becoming untouchable, not because of the money, but because I was no longer a character in their story. I was finally writing my own. A year passed. It was a year of firsts. My first real job in my field, my first solo vacation, my first holiday season spent exactly how I wanted, quietly, with a good book and a cup of tea, far away from any forced family gatherings. My apartment, once new and a little empty, now felt lived in. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The walls were covered in art I'd picked out, and the shelves were full of stories. It was my sanctuary. One sunny afternoon, I took a photo of my living room, the sun hitting a stack of books on my coffee table, my favorite mug sitting next to them. It was a simple, peaceful scene. I sent it to my grandmother with a short text, finally feeling settled. "Thank you for everything." A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was her. Her voice on the other end was bright and clear, lighter than I'd heard it in years. "Oh, Ruby, it looks beautiful," she said. "It looks like you." We talked for a while about my job, her garden, a new book she was reading. It was easy and warm. Before we hung up, there was a small pause, and then she said, her voice twinkling with a shared secret humor, "I'm so glad the money helps, dear." This time, a genuine, unrestrained laugh escaped me. And on the other end of the line, I heard her laughing too, because this time it was true. This time, the words weren't a trigger for a painful secret, but a celebration of a simple, honest truth. The money was helping. It had given me the foundation to build a life of my own, free from the weight of their lies. I never needed to confront my parents again. I heard through the grapevine that they had moved to a smaller town a few hours away, where nobody knew them. They were living a humbler life, a life stripped of all its pretenses. They had been judged, not in a court of law, but in the court of consequence. Their punishment wasn't a sentence I had demanded. It was the natural outcome of their own choices. They had lost their home, their standing, their son's respect, and their mother's love. There was nothing more I could ever say or do to them that would be more profound than that. My revenge was never about shouting or making them suffer. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was living well on my own terms, without them. It was the peace I felt in my sunlit apartment. It was the freedom to be myself, without having to perform for their approval. It was the simple, powerful act of building a happy life on the ground where they had tried to bury me. If you've ever discovered your family's betrayal the quiet way, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from, because sometimes the calmest voices carry the sharpest justice.